Hello, my name is Matthew Bloxham. I head up the Telecom Media and Technology Research for Bloomberg Intelligence for the EMEA region. And I'm delighted to be hosting today's roundtable, which is on the topic of security for telecom transformation. Now, businesses have been on a digital transformation journey for quite some years now, and that's clearly accelerated through the pandemic. And I think it's going to get another boost from the trillion-dollar funding programs that are being rolled out by the US and EU administrations. It's also going to be helped by the rapid rollout of 5G and full fiber connectivity, as well as cloud infrastructure. The benefits to economic growth from this transformation are going to be very, very significant. And they're going to touch on every industry from agriculture, manufacturing, financial services, healthcare, and everything in between. But with these advancements, we do see new risks coming, particularly around security, given the proliferation of devices in the networks and the amount of data that's flowing through them and the increased sensitivities about protecting that data. We got a timely reminder of this, I guess, earlier this week when Apple had to rapidly send out a fix because of a messaging vulnerability. And I'm sure many people that are involved in this and watching this will have had to update their Apple software as a result. And I think because of these issues, a modern, automated and scalable approach to security is required. And telecom carriers and service providers that can respond to that challenge are definitely going to go to the top of the list when enterprises are looking for partners as they push through their digital transformation program and do it with security in mind. Trust and security are going to be incredibly important for the market going forward. Now, today's virtual roundtable, which is sponsored by IBM, brings together a stellar lineup of industry executives who've got huge amounts of experience in this area. And they're going to be discussing today how their companies are helping their businesses and their clients meet the challenges of security today and for the next decade or more. And so I'm really looking forward to a lively debate on this important topic. Now, before we begin, there's a few housekeeping notes that we need to go through. This is obviously a virtual event, so please bear with us if we get any connectivity issues. If for some reason Zoom falls over, close the app or refresh your browser and log in again, but please be patient and do try again. If you do have other applications running in the background, now's a good time to turn those off because they can affect the performance of the Zoom platform. So we want to keep this discussion very conversational. So hopefully I'm going to be doing a good job of making sure that everybody gets to contribute to the debate. But if you do have an intervention you'd like to make, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom. And I'll make sure that I do my best to include you in that part of the discussion. And if you're not speaking, please do your best to stay on mute, and don't forget, if you do want to make an intervention, to unmute yourself. And if we can't hear you, I'll definitely remind you of that. Now, we want to make sure that we hear from everybody, and we've got a great lineup today. So please make sure that when you do make an intervention, you try to keep your comments fairly short, so perhaps 1 or 2 minutes maximum, so that we can hear from everybody on as many of the topics we discuss as possible. Now, before we get started into the meat of the discussion, I'd like to introduce Alden Hutchinson, who's a partner at Security Services for IBM, who will say a few words before we get the discussion going. As I mentioned earlier, IBM is sponsoring today's roundtable, and we're grateful for their participation and support for the event. Alden, over to you.
Thanks, Matthew. As telecoms have continued to evolve from closed systems to hybrid networks and now to cloud-native architectures, we see the attack surface that threat actors can operate on has evolved and increased. In the past, telcos were leveraging systems that were difficult to replicate, so only the most sophisticated threat groups with a deep knowledge of those closed environments were able to discover and attempt to exploit vulnerabilities. However, now the barrier to entry is much lower, and threat actors can build software-based replicas of telco networks in order to find and exploit vulnerabilities in container images, virtual network components, partner-supplied solutions, edge computing resources, Open RAN services, and IoT devices. And because of this, we think it's imperative that telecom companies must take a zero-trust approach to security and also shift left their security into their development lifecycle. They must implement more rigorous testing of partner solutions, ensure they don't become exposed to vulnerabilities introduced to those products, and they must carefully consider certification requirements that they have for the thousands of IoT, OT, and other smart devices that are allowed to operate on their networks to ensure they don't become weaponized against the telecom networks as well as their other customers. We at IBM believe security is a team sport. These challenges I've highlighted will require significant coordination between all parties to be handled properly. Security and IT working together to properly secure the infrastructure as it's deployed. Security and development, testing and correcting vulnerabilities before they get into production. The business and security ensuring that requirements are baked into solutions from the conception and not bolted on as an afterthought. Supplier solutions being thoroughly vetted and certified before being allowed into the network. And finally, collaboration across the telecom and security industries to leverage the latest capabilities in automation, orchestration, artificial intelligence, machine learning to quickly detect, resolve, and recover from the latest threats in order to minimize their impact to our critical infrastructure. I'm looking forward to an engaging conversation today and would like to thank everyone for joining us. Thanks, Matthew.
Great. Thank you, Alden, for those introductory remarks. I think that's great framing for the debate we're going to have. Now, I guess that the first question that I'd like to pose to you all, really kind of to open things up, is just to get a sense of the kind of discussions you're all having with your vertical industry clients about security. I guess, to some extent, how far up the list of priorities it is for them in those discussions, and whether it's something that that they're essentially trying to completely outsource to you as partners, or whether they're looking to kind of retain some ownership of the security issues that they have to address. Who'd like to open us up on that one?
I'll jump in, Matthew.
Hi.
I think the days of trusting your communication service provider to take care of security in some sort of black box with limited visibility, those days are gone. I think we need flexible models tailored to specific industries because all of their requirements are different, compliance, customer requirements. So the way we're approaching it is a baseline set of services for all of our clients, and then we will also offer enhancements. Some industries, I think, are going to want to perform the majority of security services themselves, while others may look for some sort of outsource model. And we're learning that a lot of clients want to see every aspect of their security environment, whether they do it or we do it. They need that assurance that things are being done right. And I would lastly say that I think visibility, automation, and control are sort of the three tenets that we're really seeing in those client conversations.
Matthew, would you mind if I added to that?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
No, I think just to echo, really, I think historically people used to talk about this sort of two phases. It's either we're going to do it in-house and perhaps DIY versus we're just going to outsource. I think we can all concur those days are gone. I don't think there's a CISO in the world that would say, I'm just going to outsource, and with that goes all the risks. So it's that responsibility, and it's very much one of co-management. And that really, I think, is a fantastic journey because it enables our end client to understand actually what's the investment they have, what is it that they really want to perhaps focus their scarce skills that they've made, and they know that they can retain a certain size of security organization, and therefore how can they bring in support through co-management and automation, but perhaps deal with the volume activities that arise, and then really focus on the anomalous sort of behaviors. I think my other observation on this one is certainly, I think during COVID, the conversation changed from being one of purely security focused to being a lot more now about business needs, business outcomes. And that in itself, I think, drives a different behavior between traditionally what would have been an IT discussion and a security. When you talk about business outcomes, both need to come together to achieve that.
And I think as well, building on those comments, one of the things that we're starting to realize as a cloud provider, as well as a provider of other services, that in many respects, a lot of customers and industry vertical customers are starting to realize that they can reimagine their security model in a cloud environment where they're able to implement more things in different and better ways by design than has historically been available. So there's definitely a groundswell of not just taking their older security models and using the new services to implement it, but taking advantage of the opportunity to reimagine the way that higher levels of security can be delivered, and increasingly delivered by default, and in many cases, moving up the stack and letting the providers take care of some of the lower elements, notwithstanding the need to provide telemetry and visibility to help the customers assure that those continue to be done well.
And maybe Matthew, because you also mentioned vertical industries, I'd like to pick into that because I agree with what my colleagues have said here. It's of course also about speed and adaptability. We see that you're with the client for the life cycle. We just heard it's about outcomes, it's about the business. But there as well, of course, we see that different vertical industries have, let's say, different impacts, because when you talk to a bank, it's all about reputation, it's all about compliance, and hence we see that there's a disproportionate amount of DDoS attacks on them. Whilst, for example, if you're in the pharmaceutical area, then of course you know that your data is these days more valuable than financial data. And that means as well that, of course, they're going to go more after the data and stealing the data and making money of that data. Whilst against in the manufacturing space, as mentioned by Aidan, it's all about your OT, your operational technology, your supply chains, etc. So that, of course, leads us as well to kind of like how those players will be attacked in a differentiated way. And that builds as well on templates. So you can have one size fits all, but then you can differentiate to those industry vectors to say like, well, this is where you best spend your money to ensure that you have the right type of optimized type of approach. So really it's about ensuring that you don't give the burglars or the kind of like hackers the value, but you give the value to your vertical industries in an optimal type of way.
And there's a partnership aspect here that I think we should go back to, which is everybody has a different focus and capability what's going to be core to them. And I think looking at the audience here and in my peer group, we are all in a position where we have cross-functional data sets where analytics can be provided about what a threat is in a certain geography, a certain vertical, where we can bring that data together where no individual end user or organization really can have that level of visibility, versus what the action of a financial team inside an individual organization may do with their documents. That is data that is best served by the individual organization. And so if you look at the partnership where there's two different views of data analytics of services can come together, it really puts us in a better position to be able to provide what service providers can provide incremental value around, or where a certain organization may have visibility to their own day-to-day actions, business processes, et cetera.
I think
just to add to that, the whole shared responsibility model is we have to worry about it from 2 points of view, right? From our cloud service providers, and understand that shared responsibility model between the two of us. But then the same thing, we have to make sure that all of our customers understand that shared responsibility model. What are we responsible for, and what are they still responsible for? So that's a conversation we're increasingly having.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think partnership is more and more important. I think there is a lot of things that are gone, but one will stay, which is the lack sometimes of awareness that we have throughout the organization about the importance of a zero trust approach. And on the other side, the type of partnerships that we exert throughout our value chain and supply chain. Last August in Italy, for example, and I would say 2021 in general, has been, and it is being, a great year for attacks being perpetrated throughout and through the supply chain. So partnership becomes a word that will evolve and is evolving over time. It will remain such semantically, but in its inner circle requires a different paradigm. So, and I would say particularly in terms of mindset. So partnering with our vertical customers, all telcos have vertical clients, and throughout the value chain will be the next steps of our strategy.
Just on that point, I think an important conversation we need to have is where the risk is in 5G, because we talk a lot about the overall cyber threats and the areas that have been mentioned, supply chain, IoT, those kinds of things. But I think often what I can add is that we don't necessarily all agree with each other, right? And it's not until we see the first attack where the threat actors will actually prove who is right and who is wrong. So I think we need to have more shared dialogue on talking about what's possible versus what's likely, and ensure that we're focusing our efforts on where that's most likely going to hit us ultimately.
Okay, Alden, was there anything that you'd like to add based on what you've kind of heard from the rest of the group?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's got a great perspective on this. I do believe that the supply chain, as we see more and more attacks occurring through that method, is so critical, and it requires so much coordination between the telcos, their upstream partners providing software and hardware solutions, and their downstream clients, in making sure things are tested, everyone understands their scope of responsibility. And so, those are going to be critical conversations to have, and they'll continue to evolve as these technologies continue to evolve.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we talk about partnerships, and it's almost like it's a three-way partnership, because there's the client on the one side, and then there's ultimately a multitude of partners on the supply side they're dealing with the carriers and the software and hardware providers too. So it's quite a complex dynamic that's going on there between the ecosystem partners. I mean, I guess on that point, maybe a follow-up is where your perspectives are on where the greatest sensitivities of any discussions are right now, about whether it's the security risks around proliferation of devices and endpoints, or whether it's particular vulnerabilities in the types of software that clients are using, or the fact that they're shifting infrastructure or services into the cloud from a physical location. Be interesting to kind of hear some perspectives on that.
Yeah, and a few people have already raised the topic of zero trust. And this is something that I think is key. I think, unfortunately, though, the term zero trust, can be quite misunderstood out there in the customer base in general. I mean, the way we tend to think about it is, it's not so much zero trust, but zero implicit trust, which means every device, every user, every software component needs to be continuously verified, and a more explicit trust decision made. And I think one of the things in our experience of having implemented zero trust capabilities, both from a user access perspective and a core production environment perspective, I think it yields tremendous benefits, not just in the security, increasing the levels of security, but also it's implicitly helps you develop, to the point of the question, that wider understanding of what the inventory of devices are. And it also provides this tremendous base to start building on the necessary improvements that everybody has to make on software supply chain risk, as well as more physical supply chain risk. So I think we're going to see more and more of that zero trust. But I think I'd encourage everybody, both providers and customers, to actually start asking the next questions about what do we actually mean by zero trust in a specific context, because I think it's a phrase that may be losing some of its value because of overuse, and asking the next question about what levels of trust are being checked in a particular context is the next important conversation.
And if I can just pick up on a couple of bits that Phil mentioned there, I think zero trust, absolutely a massively overused word without really people getting a real consistent understanding of it. But if you think about many of the multinationals that we all support and we all provide to, is they've got an incredibly complex estate. On one hand, there is a great journey that people are on to a multi-cloud, simplifying their approach. But actually, for many organizations, they're stuck still with a fairly entwined on-prem network that is going to live for some time. So where we look at zero trust, on the one hand, we've got a great opportunity of having a true zero trust architectural approach, but actually need to go a step further. And the clients we work with is really be bold enough to say, actually, we're going to manage this from a position of we have been breached. We're going to learn actually how to manage a dirty network for the part of the network that hasn't been born as new, where we don't have that confidence. So therefore, it is quite a sort of complex outlook. And the last thing I'll say, Phil mentioned that inevitable word of inventory. Whilst we look at some fantastic tooling, some fantastic capabilities out there, it still comes back, and we work with many clients on this, is really having confidence that you understand your estate. You may, for example, have the best automated patching process or tooling in existence, but if you don't know your inventory, you don't know what you're trying to patch, it's absolutely a waste of time. So investing in that inventory to really understand what you have before you then start to architecture something new.
Yeah, I will totally build on those two things. The one aspect of zero trust that I think people sometimes forget is that it actually simplifies the user experience, the end user experience. You don't have to go through corporate VPNs and multi other layers of controls if you have a well-defined and well-implemented zero trust policy. And we talk a lot about devices and identities and software identity. But I think we need to focus just as much on the microsegmentation part of it. The previous speaker just talked about assume you'll be breached. And so, reducing that blast radius is super, super important. And what becomes really, really hard to do is to do that across a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environment. Is how do you do that, reduce that blast radius when, you may have applications that are scaling from something on-prem to something in the public cloud.
Mm-hmm. And maybe edging on to that, because cloud is the other element you mentioned, Matthew, and also was mentioned here. And for us, with what we do in terms of our intelligence-led approach at Orange, it's always about where do we see the statistics, how many things are generating incidents, but also following up from that, where does it come from? What happened actually? And in the cloud, we see that actually only something like 19% of all of the incidents come from the cloud. The cloud is a highly secure environment, but where does it come from? Actually, 50% of all the misconfiguration errors are cloud misconfiguration errors. And that means, of course, that it's all about expertise. It's about how you approach that. And to Aidan's point, that starts all the way at the beginning with a DevSecOps type of approach, but also by knowing kind of like cross borders, what the security elements are, what the cloud knowledge brings, etc. And that leads us also onto what I would call response, because many partners have put then zero trust in place, or what goes on for zero trust these days, and also kind of like cloud security elements in place. But one thing that we see a lot of clients getting into now is what do they do if it happens? Yeah, yes, you can segment a network or whatever, but what happens? How are we organized to really respond to this? And what happens next? And that's really what I wanted to add here. Yeah.
Matthew, as you go back to your original question, what are we seeing from clients in regards to where their focus is? Really, a lot of things that have been discussed thus far have been about the security controls deployed, about the configurations deployed, how do you evolve those? And those are absolutely concerns for our customers. But there's a lot of energy on the incident response, the detection, the how do I go through the massive amounts of data, actually collect it, actually look at it, and discern actionable information out of it. And so we see our customers spending a lot of time and energy around what is good, what is bad, and then how do we scale statistics to put it in a position where that's actually usable by a small number of human beings, because data is great, but it's useless unless it's actionable. And so we've spent a lot of energy with our clients in regards to marrying that visibility and that statistical modeling with intelligence to be able to bring out what is a particular actor group, what is a particular ransomware campaign, how is it exhibiting itself across those data sets, and being able to extract information. And so the marriage of those two is something that we've had a lot of discussions with our customers around in regards to how do they find the thing they need to react to, because even the best deployed security controls and the best configuration ultimately will need to respond to something at some point in time.
And I just want to put a sharp edge on this. I mean, we talk about buzzwords, zero trust and AI and ML and things like that. We talk about microsegmentation, and unfortunately, I think the technology landscape has sort of overused and sort of morphed what a lot of these terms mean. But what it really comes down to is responding and recovering, right? The security paradigm has shifted. If you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, which I'm sure many of my peers on the call here follow, it really emphasizes respond and recover, because the days of just stopping bad things from happening at your perimeter, those are over. You need to invest more of your time and more of your manpower in what do you do when something goes wrong, and how do you quickly restore service.
I think we all need to invest more time in, at the end of the day, what makes data and information actionable intelligence. Let's face it, we are talking about zero trust, but I may add other buzzwords like cyber resilience, for example, or secure by design. And I particularly debate with peers and colleagues and partners when it comes to secure by design, because secure by design meaning secured when? Right at the moment when you have put a stamp on it, that is secured, but then what happens after? And that will lead to more and more important aspects, like, for example, technology, fine, is okay. Tools, we all love our tools, to develop them internally or to buy them from great vendors. But at the end of the day, what we struggle with is information that becomes intelligence. What to do with this data? We all know that AI is meaningless without huge amount of data, but huge amount of data per se is useless. So intelligence, profound, deep, specialized intelligence is only possible within an ecosystem, which means industry, government, and other bodies that all together can generate valuable information that ultimately can be turned into intelligence. And this is actually the very challenge that I am and a lot of people I know are facing right now.
Speaking about security by design, SDL, DevOps, DevSecOps, there's so many terms for that work. It has to be embedded into that continuous development flow, because you're right. Otherwise, it's a point in time attribute, and we know that point in time attributes don't really work for security. But we actually did a study on this, a full ANOVA analysis on what is the impact of a well executed continuous flow secure development lifecycle on the respond and recover and detection side of the cybersecurity framework, and we found very, very clear correlation between those two events. The teams and the product lines that are built with the secure by design paradigm in a continuous automated flow paradigm result in fewer detections and opportunities to respond. So that was like really, really clear indication that the investments that we've made in that are worth making and are paying off.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, and it's kind of come up a few times, and you touched on it again there. the need to put security at the center at the beginning of the process of designing these systems. As businesses go through their transformation. But we've also heard that it's very rare where you get a blank sheet of paper that you start again from scratch, and that you're having to manage a transition from on-site legacy systems to a new environment. I mean, how do you balance those where you can't, you're not essentially starting from the beginning, you're having to kind of evolve a philosophy and approach based on what's there already?
I think on that point, I think a key part of this is the culture that you set before you even start getting to the technology. Is actually, what is the culture? And if I look at BT, where we're in the throes of with most telcos, quite a significant transformation, dealing with actually our acceleration of our cloud usage and products, and at the same time managing fairly complex networks. And it's really getting everybody sort of galvanized behind why security is important to us as a business first, because it really changes, first of all, the perception to say, well, security is there just as that afterthought. It's the guard dog approach to being actually how security is a guide dog for us as BT, and indeed many organizations. And it comes back to something we said, Matthew, you said right at the start, which is around trust. And now for us, whether it's in a security business or any form of services businesses, trust is so critical to the relationships that we form with our consumers or with our clients in B2B. And therefore, actually getting everyone galvanized behind that and why trust is so critical, I think sets at least the basis for a different cultural approach.
Yeah, Matthew, I want to go back to what you just said. You talked about some of the burdens of legacy infrastructure. That's one of the benefits that Dish has, is that we are building a standalone virtualized 5G network, and we're not shackled by some of the legacy infrastructure of some of our competitors, right? And when we talk about shifting left and what are we going to do to truly embed security into the process, we think of it 4 ways, right? Detection and response, and continuous monitoring of every environment in the network. We also talk about integrating security into CI/CD from the very inception of development through production promotion. Then we want defined and tested security use cases for every security control and network function. That means not necessarily trusting that something's working, but verifying along the way. And then continuous hardening through private initiatives, through community initiatives and industry forums.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, just kind of building on that. I mean, I think it's important for a lot of the service providers, telcos, cloud providers, and I think a lot of us are doing a pretty good job of this these days, to provide migration paths for customers as part of their overall application and service modernization, so that it's not just a re-architect everything from scratch to get the benefits of the higher levels of end-to-end control. I think more and more you see many, including us, providing some on-premise services, some paths to take older applications and start wrapping them in various services that enable them to be brought more into the more modern security and application management ecosystem, to give customers the time to transition while getting earlier benefits from some of the more advanced security controls. And so I think, again, there's a lot of cloud providers especially providing that kind of migration path. But I think, to that point about culture, I mean, I think it really does come down to thinking about how do you embed every aspect of improving security resilience and providing for a constant environment of preventative maintenance, such that things are constantly upgraded as you opportunistically get the new features from the providers. One of the big things I think that's going on, I think we're all in the middle of driving this, is, for the first time in a long time, security is being provided by default by large numbers of providers. And in many respects, customers sometimes just need to figure out a way of taking every update they can get from their telco, their cloud provider, their other service provider, that are baking in these new controls all the time. And one of the, I think one of the great competitive dynamics out there now that I think is going to benefit all customers is that adding more and more security features that are easier and easier to use, that are lower and lower cost, that have more effect, is a competitive edge for companies. And so let's be honest, we're all competing with each other to do better and better at that, which is fantastic for customers.
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe like to bring Carrie at this point to touch actually on that, you know, from a perspective of TELUS, you know, that kind of competitive dynamic where TELUS sees the boundary of its remit in terms of security, both its own network and what it can provide for clients.
I think it goes to the comments that were made earlier about trust and confidence, right? It's about your reputation and your ability to manage this infrastructure, the reliability of it and the security of it, as well as the transparency that you provide to customers. So, you know, what we do for our customers is we produce effectively a security transparency report. It shows, you know, everything that goes on our network that we detect, from DDoS attacks to, you know, malicious software attacking endpoints. And I think that for our customers that see that, it gives them a sense of confidence. They obviously must have these security controls in place, and they must be trusted and verified and working, or how else would they, you know, be able to report that, you know, we stopped this many DDoS attacks, or we blocked this many, you know, malicious hacking attempts, or, you know, we actually blocked a dangerous portion of the internet from affecting their infrastructure that are connected to our network. And so I would love to see the rest of the industry be able to do the same, to be able to get themselves to an equivalent level where, you know, it's more like a weather forecast, right? You can go on an app and see where the danger spots are, and then you can guide your business accordingly, right? Or you could make the necessary preparations that you need to take on your side, you know, to see where your soft spots might be.
Alden, I'm going to bring you in too here, because I mean, I guess IBM as a company, you know, probably sits in a really fascinating spot in this kind of corporation competition dynamic between IT service providers and carriers. I mean, how does IBM see your role in helping telcos to develop, but also, you know, being out there and leading the charge on security as IBM?
Yeah, you know, it is an interesting position, because we are having conversations with clients every day about how do they adopt all of the security controls available to them in these cloud environments. So looking at what the telcos and the cloud service providers are offering, do they choose the native controls? Do they implement their own third-party controls on top of those? How do they apply those things consistently when they're in a multi-cloud environment? And then we're also partnering with our telco partners to help them modernize their own environments, and how do they deliver those sets of controls to their customers that their customers are looking for. So it's an amazing position to be in, to be able to see both sides of those transformations occurring and be able to help guide the process along the way. You know, I think to Phil's point, clients are, as they move and journey to the cloud, they want to adopt a more secure foundation. They understand that they've got this opportunity right now to move from legacy to more modern platforms, and they should bake in security into those from the beginning. So they are, you know, very much taking it under serious consideration what the best approach is. And because these controls evolve so rapidly, they're having to evaluate them constantly. You know, is there a better identity strategy? Is there a better data security strategy? And that needs to be reevaluated constantly to make sure they're taking the most opportunity to take advantage of the new foundational features.
I think, Matthew, if I can just pick up on that sort of Kerry alluded to a few minutes ago, in terms of understanding your soft spots within your architecture or your organization. It was certainly from discussions that we've had with clients over probably the last year, is recognition that I think a lot of organizational boards now are trying to get a far richer baseline as to actually how good are we when it comes to security. And the challenge therefore is, I'm sure we can all point to lots of cyber risk matrix, cyber risk tests that are out there, which were something that was done annualized or twice a year. We looked at this and said, well, given the dynamic nature of the threat landscape, how can something that was done 6 months ago really give that confidence that you've got the right security measures, particularly in sort of a regulated industry where you've got to keep relevant to certain standards? And it's something that we've invested in recently. We announced an investment in a capability with Safe Security that is going to give you more of a dynamic view as to actually how your posture rates against whether it's NIST, whether it's ISO 27001, so that actually you're constantly getting a view as to where you are against those standards. And that's something that a lot of clients are now looking for. And I think from a board perspective, boards are driving that as well. They don't want a static position. They want to know where people are at a given time.
Yeah, just to build on that point, I mean, I don't think that industry is as mature as it needs to be, but I do love the concept, right? We have Down Detector for reliability. It's out there on the internet every day, and any cloud or service provider that has an issue is being monitored by that. So I'd love to be able to get to the place where we have a Down Detector for security amongst our, our service providers and our hyperscalers. So certainly applaud your efforts with that company, and but hopefully in a few more years of investment and maturity in that, it's something that more of us will be able to embrace.
I'll piggyback on that. I think most of what we're discussing is valid for large customers. For example, at TIM, we have about 10,000 large connectivity customers. But when it comes to small and medium business, for example, which is the DNA of the Italian economy, then we have to scale it back, and we have to take into consideration that the cultural and awareness factor is still a critical challenge. So automation is great. More technology, different approaches, meter approach, NIST and all that are great. But when it comes to small and medium, for example, from a telco perspective that wants to make money on security and on cyber, then I don't want to say that we are at ground zero, but there is a lot to build, starting from awareness first and culture.
Sorry, go on.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think the topic of SME security, I think we've got a different approach, and I guess I've seen operating globally, different countries respond differently. But if I can take the UK, where actually it's a real collaborative effort, on one hand, recognizing how SMEs can really help advance the industry, but at the same time recognizing the risks they present to the supply chain. So this is where I think government working with industry have made some good steps forward in terms of introducing some SME sort of out of the box startup kits, some basic guidance that people can take and consume and just improve their hygiene. And part of it is just a massive awareness. So I do think that in the age of sort of digital prosperity and how we see SMEs growing our individual countries, that it's where we, I guess, as larger organizations working with government, have got a responsibility to help uplift the security standards.
Agree. I think the default on aspect of delivering internet with security is an important topic that we need to address. There's another side to that, though, which is we, in many cases, have visibility into where the actors exist, where their malware delivery is, where their command and control sits, how they're actually breaking in. And as a group, being able to lean in and actually disrupt the actor infrastructure, be able to be in a position to raise the cost of their ability to achieve their objectives, will also provide a benefit to that group that may, in many cases, not be able to defend themselves against, say, an advanced ransomware actor or a nation state. And so each of the organizations here that provide infrastructure to the internet, making sure that they put their foot forward and say, we are going to block the malicious infrastructures that crosses our network or uses our servers or whatever it may be that we're providing, is an important part. So we've been in a position to take down command and control of botnets at the order of a few a day for a number of years and be able to make a material impact. And we've seen that benefit to customers. And so we're looking forward to collaboration from the rest of the group on that front.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, because I think we're definitely seeing a much bigger appreciation from customers about the scale that we can collectively provide and that visibility that we have, like, for example, the visibility that we get to threats off 4 billion Chrome endpoints is a great source for us to then apply that collective knowledge of threat actors to feed that into other products. And I think more and more customers are starting to appreciate that when they sign up for providers with all of our kind of scale, that's the intrinsic benefit to these services, and I think that's going to continue.
Chris, I was hoping to bring you back in for a few comments, but maybe kind of shift the debate on a little bit. We also, Orange is an international, even global business. It's interesting to hear some perspectives about whether the emphasis on the security priorities of clients or how you need to approach it varies from market to market at all, or the type of organizations you work with?
Well, it's very much a global and local type of approach because, as we discussed already, kind of verticals are kind of like a differentiated type of approach, or there's a differentiated approach possible at the very least. Of course, we see that you've got different digital ecosystems out there. China just announced their data privacy rule set to change. And that, of course, has a knock-on effect not only on Chinese companies, but all of the companies that are doing business with Chinese companies as well. So you've got several ecosystems out there in the world. And that is, of course, something that leads to a certain level of sovereignty. So it's not only your company policies and how you see security in your organization, but also nation states have a certain ecosystem in terms of how they see security, data privacy, and trust in general. And one of the things that we've been doing recently is to build a sovereign cloud. And you would say, well, sovereign clouds are they're out there, everybody's doing it, etc., all great. But actually, the problem with sovereign clouds has always been that they're running behind on technology. So they bring you that nation state type of feeling, that trust, etc. However, they don't bring you the technology. It's always running behind from what Microsoft or AWS is doing. And this is now becoming possible. And we've done it together with Capgemini at Orange, called Bleu at this moment in time, to bring this into a French or a European ecosystem with the relevant laws around it, the relevant legal setting around it, but also to ensure that we can stay up to date in terms of the technology by having a separate kind of like instance of Microsoft Azure, Dynamics, etc., O365. And that's something as well that we see proliferating now, that there is definitely a sort of sense of geopolitical fragmentation, and globalization is working very much differently than before.
So we are kind of coming into the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, the debate, and there's definitely a few more things I want to get through before we close. I think one interesting point, perhaps, to get some observations on from the debate so far, is the monitoring of threats and attacks and how you respond to it. The networks and the data going over them is proliferating, getting increasingly complicated. I mean, how do you evolve your systems and networks to actually be able to monitor those threats in an appropriate manner, and I guess automate the response to those threats, because I guess realistically, a long time since it's been beyond the kind of the human capability to address everything that's going on simultaneously. So I mean, any thoughts on those challenges would be interesting to hear.
I think if I perhaps start off on this one is, you're absolutely right, the proliferation of data, the massive increase in data, before you can perhaps step back and say, if we'd had this discussion 3 years ago, we'd be saying, well, yes, let's build this data lake and we can then solve our problems. I think it's recognition those days are gone. So first of all, it's really being clear on actually what is your tooling strategy. Because unless you've got that point, you're simply going to be overwhelmed by data. And it's the data paradigm that most organizers face, where you want data, you want to make these data-driven decisions, but on the other hand, you don't have the tools, you don't have the skills, and you're simply overwhelmed. So it's been really clear what that strategy is. And then particularly for those that are on that journey that I think we've referred to, from perhaps on-prem to a cloud to multi-cloud, it's recognizing that you've got to have a more sophisticated, federated data searching and data analytics and data remediation model to work across all of those multiple clouds, but with clear orchestration sat in the middle. But I would say the fundamental is being really clear on that strategy to achieve it first.
Yeah, I think you've also got to differentiate between automated versus autonomic. You know, there's a lot of things out there where organizations are automating activities but not taking advantage of the platform's ability to kind of self-protect. And so, you know, I think we encourage a lot of customers to shift from automated to autonomic using the features of the platform.
Yeah, I'm just going to build on both of those. You know, we started about 3 years ago and saw this coming, and that whole strategy of collecting the data and then figuring out what data is important. I mean, that takes years because there's so much information, and then building multiple levels of analysis capabilities, and then having those drive your automation and response, and then learning from all that. And like Phil said, going back into the beginning and going, how do we just put automatic prevention capabilities so that we don't even see those things? That is, and it's a long journey. It takes a tremendous amount of investment. You know, 3 years, and we're still growing and learning. So I think to me, I've seen this kind of shift in security in the last 3 to 4 years. You know, we used to have this tremendous reliance on individual tools, and the shift is really now to data. And security data, and enriched by all kinds of other information that enterprises have and your networks provide. And I think when you bring that all together, the tools become much less important in the sense of you're not relying on any individual tool to provide you. Your reliance on individual tools becomes lower, and your reliance on the intelligence and information and how you analyze it and how you respond to it becomes so much more than the tool itself.
I totally agree on that. As a matter of fact, in my view, one of the best approaches to monitoring and data is it depends on what you're really monitoring and the data set you're starting from. For example, the security requirements of the banking system or of a gaming industry are very, very different from those of a utility company. And there are two types of customers that team addresses. Well, when it comes to banks, for example, they are probably the most protected, not necessarily the most secured. But when it comes down to utility, then most oftentimes we start from a white paper, partnering with the chief information officer, CISO, and asking the critical question, what is your problem? They all have the necessary tools in place already. It's not a problem. It's not a matter of having the technology. It's a matter of properly addressing differently the critical issue that these people are having and building a strategy around it, and probably right after adjusting technology.
I think it's always a good saying that if you've got something that is worth €1, don't draw €2 after it to protect it, right? So, and what we're seeing indeed is this crossover between what you can call data science and security coming together. And yes, it starts with a vast amount of data. They always say like data is the new oil. Well, I'm not buying it. Oil is scarce. Data is in abundance. It's also unstructured. And as a result, you need to make sense of it. It was already mentioned that humans and technology, probably machine learning, that's what we're using at the moment, need to come together to categorize the data. But then it's all about data governance around it, which then brings you into all the next steps that you can take. But it's also true that sometimes you do lose data, and that's back to the response, making it full circle. If you do lose data, then you need to be able to either recover it or also create kind of like compromise assessments to ensure that you take the right route forward. It's all about risk management, right? It's not always yes or no. And that means as well that, for example, for a client of ours, they lost a significant piece of their data that was also significantly important to them. And we went after it with kind of like a deep search, both on the known internet, the dark web, and then kind of the deep net, etc. All of those nice things. But we got it back in 24 hours. And that means as well that it's important to be able to respond after all of that categorization, because as we said, all of our data categorization, governance, etc., due to the abundance of data and the growth of data, might not just be perfect at this moment in time.
Great. Thanks for that, Christophe. So we're just a little bit under 5 minutes to go, so I want to move the debate on to a final topic and make sure that you all get the opportunity to kind of make some last remarks if you've got something you want to add in. And that topic is around skills within your organizations, and I guess also on your client organizations too, the extent to which the kinds of skills that you're needing in your staff are changing, and the extent to which you're finding it difficult to kind of find people with those skills, or to kind of retrain people that you've got in your organizations to adapt to security playing a much more important role within the end-to-end process. Maybe Mike, I can get some perspectives from you.
Yeah, so we've, like everybody, spent quite a bit of time assessing how do we bring in the right talent into a security organization? How do you find somebody that understands, quite frankly, every corner of technology, along with the risks it poses, the business impacts, and the process? I just described what many of us would call a unicorn in regards to that. And so what we've looked for is people that have some subset of those skills. In my area, I spend a lot of time focused on architectural minds. And we look at people in the world who understand detail in a very specific area very well. Well, in security, the need is to understand the systemic or the systematic way that we look at technology being implemented. And so somebody with that architectural mind really can apply it to any area, can apply it to whether that be software, systems, door locks, whatever it may be that we're looking at from a security perspective. The other is looking at people that are very collaborative, because at the end of the day, security can't be an island in any organization. We need to be in a position where people can walk into a room and engage their peer group who may own that technology or that process or that business risk item, and be in a position where the motivation is there and the buy-in is there to get them to join in that journey of risk remediation. And so an organization that sits off to the side and is an island to that company is not of any value to actually materially minimizing risk. So if they can see that big picture, if they could be in a position to collaborate towards a better position of lowering risk, we've had some great success with hiring those folks. Even if they're not a security professional by trade, we can bring the security part to them, and that's been able to make a big impact on our teams.
Yeah, Mike, I think I'm sorry, I was going to say, Mike, I think you hit it on the head. What we've started doing is really focusing on core skills, and it's really some of the soft skills I think are important. So we covet things like communication skills, confidence, influence, curiosity, and also we want people that understand how to solve problems. But if we can get some of those core skills, what that's going to enable us to do is not just train them on security, but then translate that security message to the business, to the customers. And so really finding what you want as far as those things, and then teaching people about telecom security or whatever the case may be, I think is a better strategy. And I would assume many of the others on the call are using that same approach.
So we are probably in our last minute or so. So maybe Alden, a quick observation from you on that, and then I can wrap it up.
Yeah, I do agree. I think problem-solving skills, communication skills, collaboration skills are really the key. You can teach and train any new technology, but you can't teach those skills. There's got to be a sense of paranoia that have you turn over the last stone that you need to. And so you really need people who go that extra step, pull on that extra thread, looking for the security problems, and not just assume they already know the answer, that they already have resolved all the issues. So those skills are paramount in any good security professional.
Great, thanks, Alden. Well, I mean, I want to say thank you to everybody that's taken part today. Your insights have been incredible. We are going to provide a summary of this, which will be available online. We'd like to thank again our sponsor, IBM, for the event, and to everybody, thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.